Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are you numb yet? I'm very impressed that everybody is still here, or at least the vast majority are still here. I'm really excited to be here, to be back in Iowa. This is my 5,423rd trip to Iowa, just a little exaggeration. After tomorrow, I'll be at 78 counties. I saw Chuck Grassley over there, and he reminded me that I had 21 more to go. But we are working very, very hard here. And I know that you have been deluged now with candidate after candidate talking about policy, and I was really tempted to do that, to just go through and sort of hammer through some more policy. And I really want to share some other things with you tonight. Maybe take a little different tact as we wrap up the evening and talk a little bit more about well, why I'm here. I'm here because Karen and I, who have been married 21 years, we have 7 children. And we are very, very blessed to have those 7 children. We homeschool those children. And I'm here because I believe, as Newt said, and he says it all, I say it all the time, I think this is the most important election since the election of 1860. I think this is an election where we need a leader that we can trust. I said in my announcement speech that in 2008, the American public elected someone that they could believe in. And in this election, the American public will elect someone that believes in them. And that's the fundamental difference. You've heard a lot of policy up here from a lot of people as to whether the choice for you as to whether the folks that are delivering this are authentic. Can they be trusted? These are people who stood up when they had their opportunity and did what was called to be done? Did they stand up and fight the tough battles? I heard a lot of policy prescriptions tonight. But did they have those policy prescriptions? Did they fight those fights when they had the opportunity to fight those fights? Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to whether it's national security issues, I fought those fights. I introduced a bill on Iran, the Iran Freedom Support Act, because I knew at that time it was the existential threat to Israel and the real threat. I supported the war in Iraq, but even at the time I said, the bigger threat is Iran. That's what we need to be focusing on. I introduced a bill in 2004 called the Iran Freedom Support Act, and I had no co-sponsors. No one would sign on to that bill. Within 2 years, not only did everyone sign on, but it passed unanimously in the United States Senate because they understood what I did, what I saw, which is not something popular because it was a very unpopular war that was going on in Iraq, as we know today. But I stood up and I said, here is the problem. We need to do something to overturn the government of Iran. Newt is right. What's going on in Iraq right now is that we are losing the battle to Iran. They will be stronger when we leave. They are strong now. That's why we can't get a deal with them. That's why we can't protect our soldiers. Because Iran is that sphere of influence is growing. Look at the attack the other day. Well, I shouldn't say the attack, the thwarted attack. There wasn't a mistake that the Iranians focused here on America and the Saudis. The Saudis are the head of the Islamist world. They are the head of the Islamic world. And that's why they went after the Saudis, because they want to show, Iran wants to show that they are the ones who should be leading the Islamic world in an Islamist direction. And they went after them here in the United States because they wanted to show the rest of the world that they are not afraid of going after the great Satan, because they believe that the President of the United States is too weak to respond, won't have the courage to do what's necessary to stop them. If they obtain a nuclear weapon, Iran will now have a nuclear shield to be able to do what we saw thwarted the other day on a day-by-day basis and not worry about what's going on with someone potentially attacking them, because no nuclear power has ever been attacked. I was out there on the front line before any saw this. I was opposed by President Bush, by Secretary Rice, but I fought. I've been out there on the front line on the issue of the economy and reducing the burden on our economy with these huge entitlement programs. I was the author of the welfare reform bill, not just because it cut money, but because it transformed lives. You see, I'm someone who looks at the basic economy of our country, and as you heard in the debate the other night, it was a debate on Bloomberg. It was about the economy. Not one person, except me, mentioned the basic economy, and that's the family. If we don't have strong families in America, we will not have a strong economy in this country. But I've been out there fighting the fight on the economy, on cutting government back and strengthening the family. I wrote a book. It was in response to Hillary Clinton's book. She wrote a book called It Takes a Village. I wrote a book called It Takes a Family. And it's a policy prescription. It's a policy prescription, 400 and some odd pages, of how, if we're going to transform America. I understand what Ron is saying. I understand what all the folks up here are talking about, how we have to cut this and do that. If our battle in this election, and when hopefully we're successful, is whether we're going to cut taxes for higher income people or not, we are not going to unite this country. We have to unite them on something that is commonly shared, and that's a sense of the first economy, the family. We have to unite them on how we're going to bring people together to strengthen the American families, to strengthen marriage, to create jobs. If you look at my economic plan is focused, yeah, we cut taxes, we do things, but we focus on one very important thing, and that is growing the opportunity for the middle of America to expand. I do it by focusing on the manufacturing sector of the economy. I do it. We grow that sector of the economy. You allow people who are not college educated. College educated people are doing pretty well in our economy. The rest are struggling. We don't talk about that as conservatives. Why? Why don't we? Let's talk about the family. Let's talk about those who want to provide for their families and provide them a platform, provide a society with a platform where jobs can grow that can employ people who are skilled and semi-skilled to fill that middle of America back up. Our plan does that. Our plan does it, and it can get bipartisan support to do it. Why? I was in New Hampshire the other day, spoke to the legislature, bipartisan legislature, and went through I call it my 0-0-0 plan. Because 0 is better than 9. But it zeroes out the corporate tax for manufacturers. It zeroes out repatriated profits to invest in any tax on repatriated profits that come back into the country. It zeroes out every regulation that affects manufacturers that cost over $100 million. It will create jobs in this country. And one of my supporters in the New Hampshire legislature came up to me afterward and said, you know, 2 Democrats came to him and said they'd like me to go into their district and talk about this plan because they could support something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to bring people together on the basic values of our country, on the basic things that I have stood for and fought for. This is a rally on faith and freedom. You know, there was a book written recently where they interviewed a member of the Chinese government who had worked in trying to figure out, as China was opening, they were trying to figure out what was going to make what made the difference in America, what made them the greatest country in the history of the world. And you know what it turned out to be? They said, first, what we thought, this committee that was put together, first we thought it was their economy. We figured, no, it's not their economic system. Then we thought it was their guns, their military might. No, it wasn't that. Then they thought that it was their governmental system. No, it wasn't that. You know what they decided was what made America the greatest country in the history of the world? Faith. Faith. People's beliefs in a transcendent God. Ladies and gentlemen, I've dedicated my public career to all of the things I talked about. I talked about national security, I talked about the economy, I talked about cutting taxes, but the area that I've dedicated and fought on the battlefield, well, I'll just give you a quote from last night's Bill Maher show. Bill Maher said, "Rick Santorum is like the Japanese soldier on a remote island after World War II, who didn't know that the war was over when it comes to the abortion issue and marriage and homosexual marriage." Ladies and gentlemen, are those issues lost in America? Are they lost? No. But we need to have a leader who understands in their heart and that will go out and fight for those. I've done that. I did that when I was in the United States House, the United States Senate. I didn't always do it. But when I came to the United States Senate, I had something happen to me. I know we heard some stories here of people of how they came to Christ. Well, I always say I went to the United States Senate and I found the Lord. And I did it in one of the most almost casual ways. Ended up going to a Bible study by an amazing preacher by the name of Lloyd John Ogilvie. We had a great pastor at our church, and that combination, Karen and I just became on fire with our faith. And as a result of that, I decided I had a purpose of being in the United States Senate. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then there's this bill that came up called partial birth abortion. And I looked at this and I said, you know, I'm a senator from Pennsylvania. It's a tough state. It's a state that I should probably just keep my head down, do what most folks up here do, just sort of check the boxes, but not really step out. And I decided, no more. That's why I'm here. And I went to the floor of the United States Senate and I fought the battle. I fought the battle on overturning President Clinton's veto on the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. I fought in 1996, and I fought again in 1998, and I fought again in 2000. And then the Supreme Court struck down a Nebraska statute. We kept losing because we couldn't override the president's veto. But I kept fighting. And then in 2001, President Bush was elected. So I went with a group of folks in the House of Representatives. I said, look, the Supreme Court struck down the Nebraska statute. We are an equal branch of government. We don't have to stand for this. Let's get together, pass a bill that says right in the front, the Supreme Court, you're wrong, and lays out the case as to why they're wrong. We passed that bill. It was signed by the President. It was eventually appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reversed their decision and found in favor of being constitutional. I hear a lot of theory up here. That's practice. You hear a lot of folks who say we're going to stand up to the court with tough judges. I did it. We took on the United States Supreme Court on the most controversial issue there is, the issue of abortion, and we beat them. We took them on because it's a passion in my life. Why is it a passion? I'll share a little story as I close. It's a story that happened right at the end of the first debate on partial birth abortion. There was a discussion the final day, and it was Dianne Feinstein got up and started talking about how, and this was the reason for partial birth abortion, we found out, mothers and fathers found out late in pregnancy that the baby they were expecting was not exactly what they were expecting. The baby was somehow not perfect, and therefore late in pregnancy they wanted to terminate that pregnancy. And so Feinstein got up and talked about how mothers find out that they have an abnormal baby that maybe doesn't have ears or eyes, or has organs that are outside of the baby. Basically saying that we need to cull the disabled in the womb. And I got up, and I'll quote you what I said. I said, think about the message we're sending to the less than perfect children in America, and the mothers who are right now dealing with the possibility of delivering an abnormal baby. My wife is due in March, and we haven't had a sonogram done. We're hopeful that everything's fine. But what message are you sending to me if I look at that sonogram in a week or two and things aren't just right? Well, a week later, Karen and I went in for that sonogram. And the doctor kept going over this one area. We were there with our 3 little children. And he looked at us and said, "Your son has a fatal defect and is going to die." We packed up the kids as quickly as we could. We went into the car and we cried and cried. And then I made a decision. We said, no, we're not going to just sit here and take it. We're going to do something about it. I'd just been up to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia the week before and had a meeting with a doctor who had done this breakthrough surgery, intrauterine surgery. So I called him. He said, "I don't know if we can help, but come on up." Well, after a few days, they figured out they could do something. Of course, they recommended an abortion. And of course, we told them, no. Why? Why would we kill our son? Why, if your child is in trouble, would you not do everything you can to help them? And the surgery was done. It was a miracle. It worked. We came home that night, packed up the next day because we had to head to a reunion, a family reunion over it's actually a 50th wedding anniversary of my wife's parents in Pittsburgh. The next day I'm driving on an appointment and I get a call from my sister-in-law. Come home. Karen's running a high fever. We were told that everything would probably go all right unless she ran a high fever. So I came back home, her fever was 103 and she was in labor. We knew what was going on. She had something called chorioamnionitis, which is the placenta was holding our son, was infected, and the body was trying to expel it. We went through hours of horror as we wanted to save our child, but yet couldn't save our child. He was delivered in the middle of the night. He was born alive, but far too small to survive. And we held him for 2 hours. It was 2 hours where he knew only love, not a bad life. The next day we took him home so our children could know that they had a little brother, that he was real, he was a person, he had dignity, and he was part of our family. My Karen and I struggled a lot. I remember talking to Pastor Ogilvie and he said to me, "Pray for the gift of understanding." I didn't want to. I was angry. I had committed myself to the Lord. I was doing the brave and heroic thing of standing up for life, risking my political career in Pennsylvania. And this was my answer: you take my son. Karen did more. She wrote. She kept writing. She wrote letters. She always did with all of our children from the time that they were born, the time that we found out of their pregnancy. She would have these little sonogram pictures and little diaries and notes, just telling the kids what their life was like, because we knew at the moment of conception that was our son or our daughter. She kept writing those letters, and about a month later, her mom came to see her, and she read all the letters. And she said, "You should publish them. Maybe they will help heal somebody." Well, she published this little book called Letters to Gabriel. 25,000 copies from a publisher who had never published a book before and never published another book afterwards. And there isn't a month that goes by that I don't meet somebody who was touched, whose life was saved, whose baby was delivered, or whose burden was lessened. I always tell my children that if you can do for God and for life what your little brother did in 2 hours, you will be a great warrior for God. One final story. It's from the last page of Karen's book. The last page of Karen's book, Letters to Gabriel, it's a letter to our son. And it reads as follows. During the partial birth abortion debate, a Senator Boxer, I might add, was thanking the women who had had partial birth abortions from coming forward with their stories. There were women in between the elevator of the Senate office buildings and the Senate chamber itself who had had this procedure, and they were buttonholing senators trying to get them to vote against this bill. She says, quote, "They're crying. They're crying because they don't understand how senators could take away an option. They're crying because they don't believe that those senators truly understand what this meant for their families." Karen continues, "Daddy said in response, the senator says she hears the cries of women outside this chamber. We would be deafened by the cries of the children who are not here to cry because of this procedure." The Washington Post described what happened next. Republican Senator Rick Santorum turned to face the opposition and a high pleading voice cried out, "Where do we draw the line? Some people have likened this procedure to an appendectomy." "That's not an appendix," he shouted, pointing to a drawing of a fetus. "That's not a blob of tissue. It's a baby. It's a baby." The Post continued. And then, impossibly, in an already hushed gallery, in one of those moments when the floor of the Senate looks like a stage set, with its small wooden desks somehow too small for the matters at hand, the cry of a baby pierced the room, echoing across the hallway, echoing across the chamber from an outside hallway. No one mentioned the cry, but for a few seconds, no one spoke at all. A coincidence, Karen continues, perhaps. A visitor's baby was crying as the door of the Senate gallery opened at that precise moment and then closed. Or maybe it was the cry from the son whose voice we never heard, but who has changed our lives forever. You want to know why I'm pro-life? Do you want to know why I stand up and fight for the family and marriage? Because God showed me that if you are faithful, He will be faithful. Ladies and gentlemen, we need people who are leaders in this country who believe that, who believe that the faithfulness of God, that He has blessed this country and He has blessed each and every one of us. And if we stand and we are faithful and fear not, that this country again could have a rebirth of freedom like we have never seen before. Thank you and God bless.
Senator, thank you so much for being here tonight. The first question is, what would you specifically do to prevent abortion on demand and defend traditional marriage?
I think it's really important that when you hear this question to understand it's a question about marriage and abortion. And you'll hear everybody up here say, well, most everybody say that they support traditional marriage and they support a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, to ban gay marriage. But you'll also hear, if you listen to the debates, people say that while they may support a constitutional amendment, they don't support getting involved in the states and doing something to make sure the states don't pass, either through judicial fiat or through legislation, marriage different than one man and one woman. And that is all the difference. When I first took on, there's been one vote on the floor of the United States Senate on the issue of the federal marriage amendment, and I forced it. when I was there. There hasn't been one since. There hasn't been one since. I forced it. We lost, but we had the debate. We went for the right solution. You have people up here who will tell you that they're for that, but will they push the debate? Will they have the vote? Will they take it to the American people? And one way you can tell how convicted they are is, will they go to the states and fight it where the fight is? I will. I did. I came to Iowa last year. I campaigned here in Iowa against the three Supreme Court justices who delivered same-sex marriage to Iowa. And I'll come back. No matter what, I'll come back and make sure that not only do we defeat those justices in the future, but that we go to every single state. Why? Because if we don't, then one by one, these liberal states or judicial opinions will come down. And the Supreme Court will say, well, we can't have all these different definitions of marriage, just like they did with abortion. It's the same game plan. So when people stand up and say, I'm for marriage, but I won't do anything about the states because of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment doesn't allow, Abraham Lincoln said it best, the 10th Amendment doesn't allow states the right to do wrong. And if the state of Iowa wanted to pass a gun ban, would all these folks say, oh, well, the Iowa has the right to do whatever they want? I wouldn't. No way. This leads to the other issue, which is, what are you going to do about the issue of abortion? You've heard some people stand up here and say, oh, I'd vote for a constitutional amendment. Did they? Did they ever sponsor it? Did they ever try to fight to get a vote for it when they had the opportunity? I did. Yes, I fought for partial birth. And I know there's a battle here in Iowa, and it's a good battle to have. I know it's uncomfortable, but it's an important battle to have. Do we stand on the 50-yard line on the issue of abortion? And do we throw Hail Mary passes trying to pass personhood amendments, trying to get constitutional amendments that are adopted? Or do we try to get a couple of yards? I was just at the A&M state game, so I'm using football analogies. I apologize for that. Or do we try to get a couple of yards? Do we try to get some things passed, like partial birth or fetal pain or other things? I find myself solidly in both camps, but here's the issue. Are the folks who are trying to do these incremental measures committed to scoring a touchdown? Or are they just trying to pad their stats? They're just trying to make a few first downs to keep everybody happy in the pro-life movement, and really not convicted to try to push that ball down the field. My feeling is, as a good offensive coordinator, and that's what I was in the United States Senate, I was an offensive coordinator on the life issue. I was trying to move the ball down the field. My issue on that is, you know what? Yeah, take your gains. But sometimes, as you know, as an offensive coordinator, you have to stretch the field. You have to mix up the defense a little bit. And you got to go for those long passes, whether it's the personhood amendment or whatever it is. The other thing is, we have to have a discussion when it comes to what we can do. And there's lots of things the president can do. Mexico City is certainly one of them. And we can repeal the Obamacare reg on making businesses carry abortion policies. We can get rid of the conscience clause, the phony conscience clause protection that doesn't protect people from providing abortifacients and other types of drugs. We can do all those things. We can go to the legislature. We can try to do fetal pain. We can do those things. But we do it in the context of saying, this is a human life from the moment of conception. And it is wrong. And it is, we will take this few yards, but we are coming back, because we will not differentiate what is a legal and biological fallacy, that a human life is not a person, that a human life is different because it's located in the womb as opposed to outside the womb. Some of you may remember the debate I had with Barbara Boxer on when a child was born. We were talking about partial birth. In the partial birth abortion bill, the baby was delivered all but the head. So I asked her the question, What if the baby was delivered all but the foot? Could you kill the baby then? It's on YouTube. Look at it. For 5 minutes, she can't answer the question. She won't answer the question. We started the debate with her standing right there. By the end of the debate, she was at the back of the Senate chamber trying to get out because she couldn't answer what is the truth. That it's an artificial line that we draw. And we have to have the courage to say the truth, no matter what legislation we're bringing forward.
Thank you, Senator. Next question is, what would you do to restore fiscal responsibility and promote creation of jobs in the United States?
I talked about my 000 plan as to how we're going to bring the manufacturing base in this economy and grow the middle of America again. I also talked about what I did in the area of trying to reduce government spending. Yes, we need to do to the rest of programs in Washington, D.C., food stamps, Medicaid, housing programs, education and training programs. All of these programs have no business being in the federal government. We should do to them what we did with welfare. Block grant them, send them back to the states, give the states the flexibility to implement those programs, which they should have been doing all along, and put requirements. What we did with welfare, I had two things that we required. They were the two bases that I was refusing to negotiate on. And that is, we had to have a time limit on welfare, and we had to have a work requirement. People should not be able to get government benefits unless you're disabled, unless you're either working for them or you're on for a very short and temporary period of time. That's the deal. That's why we named welfare temporary assistance for needy families, as opposed to aid to families with dependent children. That's one idea. Here's the big idea, of course, which is the balanced budget amendment. I was for cut, cap, and balance, but I argued during that time when we were dealing with the debt ceiling, what we really needed was balance, balance, and balance. We were focused on cuts, and what we should have been focusing on is focusing on the American public, saying we need to balance this budget, and we can do it. We can do it over a period of years. If you pass a balanced budget amendment, it takes 4 or 5 years for it to be ratified. According to the balanced budget amendment, it takes 5 years after that to be implemented. You're talking 7 to 8 years, 9 years. There's plenty of time to get to a balanced budget, but you put a wall. One of the things I learned in Washington, D.C., and you learn a lot with experience. You learn how the other side thinks, how they act, and all the tricks. Well, the one thing that I do know is the only way you're going to change the way things operate in Washington is to change the rules of the game. And that means you have to make it painful. You have to put a wall. Do you know when almost every bill in the United States Senate passes? What day of the week? Thursday night or Friday. Why? Because people want to go home for the weekend. It's a wall. It creates a backstop. We need a backstop. I pledge to you, not only will I try to pass I will pass our economic plan, and we will reform these entitlements. But I will grow across this country, and we will get the American public, just like we do with welfare, we'll get the American public behind a balanced budget amendment to put fiscal sanity and maintain freedom in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. Well, one last time I get asked this question. What is your comprehensive plan to shape your future administration's energy policy? And please include how this vision would differ from the approach of the current administration.
I share with everybody else that there either is a deliberate attempt by this administration to destroy the energy future of our country, or they're just simply incompetent. Pick A or B. The idea that we have, at the current rate of extraction, 263 years left of oil in this country. We have almost 300 years of coal at the current rate of extraction, which may be going up, not because we found more coal, because we're producing less coal under this administration, because you can't get a permit, and because they're in the process with a new regulation of shutting down 60 coal-fired power plants. We're going to be to the point where you turn on that switch and it's going to be, Russian roulette. Is it going to go on or not? Because of this administration and what they're doing to our power supply. And of course, natural gas. It was mentioned earlier. We found the second largest find of natural gas in the world. under mostly Pennsylvania. We're drilling 3,000 wells a year in Pennsylvania. And guess what happened to the natural gas price? You heard the president earlier this year give his energy speech. He gives an energy speech every year, just so you know that he's concerned about energy. And he gives this energy speech, and he says, drill, baby, drill is a joke. No, it's never going to work. I mean, they made fun of it, and all these students out there are laughing. This was at Cleveland State, I believe, and they're laughing, saying, oh, yeah, drilling doesn't work, supply doesn't work. It's like they teach it at that school where President Obama went to. Instead of Economics 101, he went to Economics 50 and a half. And so he ignored supply, and all he did was focus on demand. That somehow or another, the only way you're going to reduce price in America is by reducing demand. Well, guess what happened to the natural gas prices as a result of what's going on in Pennsylvania? When I left the United States Senate 6 years ago, the gas price was about $12. It's now $3.60. Supply works. We need to drill in Pennsylvania, we need to drill in Alaska, we need to drill offshore, we need to drill wherever we can. We need to have an energy policy. And I disagree with the Speaker on this. We don't disagree on much. He wants to fund everything. I want to cut every subsidy. Let the marketplace work. And that includes for oil and gas. We need to cut all the subsidies, let the market work. I agree with Newt in this respect. I learned a lot coming here to Iowa and about the ethanol industries and the efficiencies that have been created. I have no doubt that this industry can compete. Let it compete on an even playing field with the rest of the energy options in this country.
The last question would be, if you could reverse one energy-related policy decision from the last 3 years, what would it be, and what would you have done differently?
I think I agree with everybody else that the moratorium on Gulf drilling was an outrageous cost to the taxpayers, with all the lost revenue. It's an outrageous cost to the people of Louisiana and Texas, who were just that area of the country, after being devastated, was devastated again by the actions of this administration. I would just say to you that we need an administration, we need a president who has common sense. In my book, It Takes a Family, I said liberalism is an ideology. If you doubt that, look at what the president's job package is. It's the same as it was before. It was the same as his first package, which was an abject failure. Yet his answer is propose more of the same. Why? Because liberalism is an ideology, not based on fact, not based on real-world experience. Conservatism, as I defined it here, is stewardship of patrimony. Fancy words that mean taking what we know is good, what we know is true, is of nature and nature's God, is how we are ordered in our world. Take those natural laws, take what has worked in applying what our founders created, which was free people, free markets, and the ability to be able to pursue not just your dreams, but God's will in your life. You allow that to continue in America. You allow people to transform this country like we did in 1776. I remind everybody, at the time of the founding of this country, life expectancy in America, as it was in most of the West, was 35 to 40 years of age. The same as it was at the time of Jesus Christ. We were an agrarian society, the same as it was at the time of Jesus Christ. 1,800 years of kings and emperors ruling the world, and the human condition did not change. And then America, the Declaration, rights coming from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his laws in order to serve him, as I said in our Declaration. And in 235 years, life expectancy has doubled. We've been through an industrial revolution, a technology revolution. The poorest person in America today is wealthier than the wealthiest person, wealthy from the standpoint of creature comforts, than the wealthiest person 50 years ago. How many of you want to go to a hospital that's 50 years old in technology? How many want telecommunications that's 50 years old? 90% of Americans have cell phones. Why? Because we had limited government and we had a president and leaders in Washington who believed in you. Please, I ask for your help and support. Elect someone who has proven that they'll stand up for the values that made this country great and be able to win elections in states like Pennsylvania, so we guarantee that we have a Republican president in this next election. Thank you all very much, and God bless.